Köszönöm. Rose among thorns. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here this evening. And for those of you who know me, I'm Katalin Karalin, Editor-in-Chief of Helena History Press. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the publishing company today. And I'm delighted that you're all here. We founded this publishing company in 2012 because we felt there was a need for an independent publishing company publishing works about and from Central East Europe in English, which is why the program is in English and all our publications are English. And we established our press to promote scholarship in a modest way, promote scholarship, but we can do it in a modest way to fill the void that exists about the region in the Anglophone market. It is the lack of source material in English about this region that motivated us to establish a publishing house in this day and age, which I think most of you will think is probably a rather foolish venture. The key mission of ours is to support the work of emerging and independent scholars, primarily those doing original research on topics related to World War II and the Cold War. To date, we have published works of scholars from Serbia, Poland, Czech Republic, USA, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. A Polish scholar from the University of Wrocław, Joanna Wojden's book on the history of the Polish-American Congress, the first such history written in English despite the presence of 10 million persons of Polish descent living in the United States, won the Oscar Halecki Prize last year. We're very proud of that. Several years ago, we realized that the period of 1944-1945 is particularly underrepresented in English language scholarship and set about filling that void with a series of books related to Hungary during those years. The memoir of Antal Ulein Revitsky, German War, Russian Peace, was the first book published in this series, followed by this winter by The Fateful Years, the World War II memoir of Vilmos Nagybátysi Nagy, the Hungarian Minister of Defense during World War II, and the first Hungarian named of the righteous among nations by Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. Ably translated by Thomas Cooper, and with a new introduction by George Schöpflin, this is the most important first-person account of the events of World War II, written by a key participant and military decision-maker. In addition to commissioning books, as in the case with The Fateful Years, our goal is also to identify and publish important works from the Hungarian canon that have never been translated into English. This fall, we will release the diary of Miksa Fenyer, Az Elsodort Ország, A Nation Adrift, penned while he was in hiding from the Gestapo in Budapest from June of 1944 to January of 1945. As many of you are aware, Fenyer was the co-founder of Hungary's most important literary journal, the first half of the 20th century, Nyugat. Translated by his son Mario Fenyer, himself a very fine scholar, it accurately captures Fenyer's unique literary voice. This first English language edition, long overdue in English, includes an introduction by literary scholar Zsuzsanna Varga, professor of Hungarian literature at the University of Glasgow. The third work in this the fourth work in this series is a new work of scholarship and the reason for tonight's celebration, an important compendium of research related to the events of July 1944, subtitled Deportation of the Jews of Budapest Foiled, or as it's often referred to, the Koszorús Action. We are honored that Geza Jasensky was generous enough to donate his time as the editor of this volume that will shed new light on this topic. We're also delighted that several of the contributors are here this evening, and you will have an opportunity to hear from them all. One of the most important features of this volume that Minister Jasenski insisted we include are English translations of some of the key German Foreign Office dispatches related to Hungary in World War II. They have been translated from the original German. They were very hard to access, but we have Tamás Stark to thank for finding the original German documents and that were simply not available, actually, in the UK, where they had originally been placed in a repository, so we have him to thank for them. And as it's not enough to print books, but also one must distribute and market them as well, it is our agreement with Central European University Press which makes worldwide distribution of our books possible. I would like to recognize the important role that Christina Koch, the director of CEU Press, and her team play in our success. And this is one of the great problems faced by English language publications produced in Central and East Europe, is they have absolutely limited distribution or no distribution in the worldwide marketplace. And our arrangement with CEU Press allows us to market our books throughout the world. I'd like to now turn this over to Géza Jasenski, highly respected historian, former foreign minister of Hungary, a distinguished diplomat, known to all of you, friend to many of us, who generously donated his time to serve as the editor of July 1944. He will lead tonight's program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Katalin. We are all very grateful to you, not only for bringing out this book, but certainly for all the publications and for the future publications, which we hope to see, thanks to you and your associates. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to see here so many people, so many old friends, and so many people interested in that sad aspect, terrible aspect of Hungarian history. Nowadays, there is so much talk about migration, immigration, and certainly we Hungarians must be very much aware that we Hungarians are also a nation of immigrants. More than 11 centuries ago, we moved into the Carpathian Basin. But as you all know, due to many vicissitudes, especially the wars against the Ottoman Turks, the Hungarian population was depleted, and having expelled the Turks by a united Christian European force, the country had to be repopulated. There were people from the south, Serbs, Southeast Romanians, Germans, so-called Swabians from the west, and especially in the late 18th and 19th century, Jews escaping from tyranny, escaping from the pogroms of the Russian Empire. Well, of all these immigrants, they all contributed to making Hungary more successful and rich eventually, but I think we have to, an objective analysis cannot deny that the greatest contribution was by the Jews settling in Hungary. I don't have the time, and we don't need to enumerate the results, the achievements in the economy, in infrastructure, in science, in literature, which those Jews who became Hungarian patriots and great contributors to the rise of Hungary after the settlement of 1867. But as we all sadly know, this beautiful coexistence and most successful assimilation in Europe sadly came to an end in the mid-20th century, or some people would say that immediately after the First World War. Well, again, I cannot go into the details of that rather sad story, but this is why I accepted happily the task of editing this book. And it was my idea that we should give the title July 1944, because that is, please come forward. Welcome, David. And so July 1944 is a especially crucial date. And that is what I would like to explain in a few words. And if I can also use some slides showing that. Can you bring it up? Yes. As we all know, that despite the very deplorable so-called anti-Jewish laws passed starting in 1939, nevertheless, it was Hungary alone where Jews could continue to live in relative safety, so that, well, with the exception of a terrible accident, we may say, when a few thousands were deported in 1941 to Kamenets-Podolsk. But I know. Okay. So as it happened, Hungary was a so-called unwilling satellite of Nazi Germany, although of course this is also debated. Actually, 20th century, and especially the years of the Second World War, are events which are not simply hotly debated among Hungarians, not only, perhaps not so much among professional historians, but by the Hungarian public and by the outside world as well. And I am very sorry, but I don't see much chance that in the foreseeable future the passions would die. But I'm still optimistic, because today people are no longer fighting over whether Kossuth was right or Széchenyi or Deák. So eventually, perhaps, if truth is possible, it will come out. And this truth must somehow state that the Hungarians were terribly responsible for the tragedies, especially of 1944, but also there were great Hungarian people, heroes, who did a lot to mitigate this charge. And although, as we all know, more than 500,000 Jews, Hungarians in spirit and language, were killed in Auschwitz and perished in this war, but those who survived owe much to the event of the days in early July 1944. And Tom Lantos, the late Tom Lantos, the US representative, whom I had the honor to meet already in 1985 when I was a scholar, Wilson Center scholar in Washington, and he was extremely kind to the unknown young Hungarian historian, as I was then. He spoke very eloquently on a person, Colonel Ferenc Koszorús, who played a very important role in the saving of the Jews of Budapest. But of course, the story is much more complicated, and only we have to acknowledge the role of Tom Lantos, and that's why we start the book with his statement in the US House of Representatives. Well, just you can have a glimpse of what he said, just a few parts of his important colloquy. Well, one of the reasons why there is such a controversy about the year 1944 is the person of Admiral Regent Miklós Horthy. And especially in the, well, I would say that since the great changes, there is more debate about his role, the assessment of his contribution to Hungarian history than before. Of course, as we all know, under the communist times, he was, well, considered or described as a kind of rascal, a despicable character. But instead of having a more objective picture of him, we still have two contradictory opinions, either that he was an anti-Semitic person and he was responsible for bringing Hungary into the German camp and into the war, and the special charge connected with 1944 is that after the German occupation of Hungary, he stayed on in his position as regent, as head of the state, and as such witnessed the deportation, the roundup of the Jews of the countryside. Of course, as we will see, especially those of you who decide to buy and read the book, that on the other hand, without him, without his intervention at the end of June, and his decision and order, if you like, in early July to stop the deportation just when the Jews of Budapest would have been deported, it sadly temporarily, but it saved the almost 300,000 strong Jewish population of Budapest, and well, that later on so much trial and so many tragedies happened to them, it still allowed that so many of them, let's say more than half of them, survived the war and survived the Hungarian Holocaust. And as we will see from the book, and I also think that it is important to note that, yes, we can say sadly that there were many, many people, many Hungarians who were responsible or who can be held to account for the deportation and for the eventual death of more than 500,000 Hungarian Jews. But as it should not be forgotten that with all the anti-Semitic measures before and the sad atmosphere which fomented anti-Semitism, almost 1 million Hungarian Jews would have survived the war if the German army, if Hitler's orders had not invaded the unwilling satellite, the ally of Germany, on March the 19th in 1944. So I think this is something which cannot be overlooked, that without this aggression, well, this tragedy, the Hungarian Holocaust, would have never taken place. Of course, it could have happened that without this German invasion, eventually later on, the war would have claimed many victims, including Jews, but certainly this is something which we should not forget. And the person, the so-called plenipotentiary of the Reich, Edmund Wesenmayer, was, I think, the greatest criminal in the Hungarian Holocaust. And he was not executed, as we know. Here we can see him, another picture of him. And of course, his superior, his boss, Adolf Eichmann, he himself came to Hungary together with Kaltenbrunner. So after the German invasion, a large detachment of German Nazis came to supervise and to arrange for the deportation, for the death of all the Hungarian Jewish population, and by the way, for arresting and in many cases leading to the death of many Hungarian opponents of Nazism. I see the grandson and the son of one of them. So in fact, it was not only the Hungarian Jews who were victims of the German occupation, but a large number of Hungarian patriots. Wojciech Zielinski is the best known person. And as we know, a puppet government was imposed upon Hungary, led by Dömes Tójai, a military officer, but who served as Hungary's minister in Berlin for a long period, a blind pro-German, pro-Nazi, who accepted this role of the Hungarian Quisling. And I think that he was even more a traitor of the Hungarian nation than Quisling was of the Norwegian nation. Well, a picture of the bombed Budapest. This was, as we again have to emphasize, that before the German occupation, there was an unwritten agreement that the Allies would not bomb Hungary, and Hungarian anti-aircraft guns and the Hungarian Air Force would not chase those bombers. So in fact, Hungary was in the illusion that the war is going on on the far Don River and the Eastern Front, and of course in so many other theaters of war. But we are safe in Budapest, and people even in early 94, 44, could enjoy the beautiful winter, skiing and so on. So in fact, it was the Allied bombings which immediately started after the German occupation, April 44, that gave some inklings to the Hungarian public that what is in store for them. And it also obviously contributed eventually to the decision of Horthy. And then a terrible picture, and that is where the great debate is on, the deportation of these 500,000 or more than 500,000 Hungarian Jews, including the children. And I think that is something which cannot fail to touch anybody. Well, it is terrible when old people, when grown-up people are deported. But when we see children pushed on the cars, on the cattle wagons, which they didn't know, to their death, I think this is something which is very heartbreaking. So as we know, this deportation started in May 44, and in a very rapid time, practically the whole Jewish population of Hungary, except the capital, so all the Jews living in the countryside, and the vast majority of Jews lived in the countryside, were taken to the ghettos and eventually put to the trains and sent to the death camps. And so the first question, one of the first questions about that, if Horthy decided to stay on as governor, as head of state, which is anyhow controversial, and he in his memoirs also admits that this was something, a very difficult decision. But if he decided, and as he insists to say, because he thought that he could mitigate the consequences of the German occupation by staying on. So if he decided on that, why he did not at least try to prevent the deportations? Well, we cannot say that he was simply sitting there isolated in the castle. He must have known even about the details, about what happened in the ghettos, what kind of conditions there were. And if whole families are put on trains, well, allegedly to go to work in Germany, well, why these children had to go to work in Germany? So in fact, we cannot deny that Horthy should have at least tried to prevent that. Yes, he may have had to resign, and we may also say that in that case he could not save the Jews. And I think this is something which we have to face. And this book tries to answer, although inadequately, that how to judge that Horthy is totally responsible, not for he's not the main culprit. It is the Germans, Hitler, and the people we showed, but he must share the responsibility for countenancing, accepting these deportations. But then, by staying on, he was able, at the end of May, at the end of June, to decide to do something about that and to give an order to stop the deportation. Yes, we know that there were many events well, helping him to come to this decision. The Normandy landing of the Allies, certainly, which showed for all, not only clear thinking, but all people in Hungary that the war was over and Germany would lose the war. So that was, of course, important consideration. Also, the many appeals from President Roosevelt to the King of Spain and King of Sweden, and many other appeals to the Pope and so on. So as we learn also from the book and also from the documents, how the Germans were upset and tried to prevent this decision and hoped that they can pressure Horthy to allow the continuation. So anyhow, this is the crux of the matter, how this happened, and it is where we have to bring in the person of Colonel Koszorús, as he was instrumental in not simply carrying out the order, the decision of the regent, but in preventing something which was probably really in store, namely that the rabidly pro-Nazi Hungarian officials, particularly State Secretary Baki and András, they were ready to carry on the deportations even against the orders of the regent. And there were more than rumors that a coup was in the making to replace Horthy, and so to replace the person who could prevent the deportation. And the gendarmerie, which should be distinguished, that in the Hungarian law, the police was responsible for order in the towns, but in the countryside it was the gendarmerie. The gendarmerie had no right to enter the towns, including Budapest. And nevertheless, State Secretary Baki brought a large number, many thousands of gendarmerie from the countryside, well, most probably, either really to replace Horthy, but most probably determined to carry out deportation of the 300,000 Jews remaining in Budapest in a very quick succession of days or hours. And Horthy learned about that and feared this, and through the commander of his bodyguard, General Lázár, who knew very well Colonel Koszorús, who happened to be in not simply Budapest, but he was in charge of a practically secret, not known unit of the Hungarian artillery. He was ready and happy to carry out the decision of the regent, and ordered his troops, with the full agreement of his officers, to come to Budapest, to move to Budapest, and he sent message to Baki that the gendarmerie should be removed from Hungary within hours, otherwise he would use his troops. He would use arms for that. And that is what is so eloquently told by the late Tom Lantos in his eloquy. And well, that would be the end of the story. Sadly, not the end of the story for the trials of the Jews of Budapest and the remaining Jews of the country, because this was not the end. And in the coming weeks and months, the Germans continued to press for the deportation, and that is when the role of those people who helped to rescue tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews happened. Foreigners, foreign diplomats like the famous Karl Lutz, deputy consul of Switzerland, and of course the famous Wallenberg. Wallenberg arrived in Hungary just after this decision by Horthy. So if the deportations could have taken place, there would have been no one for Wallenberg and for the other great heroes and brave people to rescue and to save. So we have to remember them. Also that these various documents and forged documents, forged passports and Schutzpass, these protection papers, helped so many people temporarily or for good to save their lives. This is the famous glass house in Vadász utca. This is a house, so-called protected house under the Tsar of David, which of course was not honored, especially, this is a Schutzpass, a Swedish one. This is the Swiss flag being flown over the British legation in Budapest, because of course during the war there was no British legation here, but the Swiss took over the representation of British interests. This is Danielsson, the Swedish minister, who also played a very important role, and after all, Wallenberg was his subordinate. George Montello, a native of Hungarian Jew from Transylvania, George Mondel, who, as first secretary of the Salvadorian consulate in Geneva, was also issuing papers of citizenship, savings again, thousands, if not more than thousands, of Jews. And that is the real end of the story, when, as you know, in October the 15th, 1944, with the war coming really to an end, Horthy in September decided to ask for an armistice from Stalin, because he was told numerous times by the Allies that it is the Soviet Red Army which is approaching Hungary, which is actually has entered Hungary in September already, and so he has to turn to Stalin. And reluctantly, but he did, and he wrote moving letters to Stalin, and announced his decision to make an armistice, unfortunately not making it absolutely clear that he had already signed, that Hungary had already signed the armistice. But anyhow, the Germans got wind of that and were preparing for a coup of the Hungarian pro-Nazis, Arrow Cross, Ferenc Szálasi, who took over. And of course, Horthy was also arrested and sent to a kind of custody in Germany. His son, his remaining son, was kidnapped. And that started a new chapter for the Jews of Budapest. This is not part of the book, it's not our story, but it should be known, of course, that, well, as it was said, that the Jews living in Budapest were saved from the deportation, but after the Nazi or the Arrow Cross takeover, they had an extremely hard time, and so many of them were killed, shot into the Danube, and perished in many other ways in death marches and on. And I think the proper ending of the story is that, well, the criminals that are responsible must answer for their crimes, and no Second World War ally of Germany, including Nazi Germany, had so many war criminals executed that in Hungary. I don't say that it was wrong that so many Hungarian war criminals were executed, but I do say that it is very unfair that so many criminals from Austria, from Germany, and from Slovakia, from Romania, escaped not only the death, but even a trial. So this is when one of the Hungarian prime ministers, Imrédy, is executed in 1946 by Hungarian soldiers after a Hungarian court, so-called People's Court, in a fair trial, found him guilty. And another prime minister, the Quisling, Stolyai, being prepared for the death squad. And I must say that the really very sad aspect of this, that the arch criminal, or one of the arch criminals, Wesenmayer, escaped with 5 years imprisonment. He was sentenced for a bit longer time, but in 49, he was given a kind of reduced sentence, and I think in 51, he was finally released. He became a rich businessman, and he died, as we say in Hungarian, among pillows in bed. So this is certainly something which shows that crimes should be prosecuted, but the real criminals sometimes escape the real punishment. Well, it was a long introduction, I know, and I ask for your patience because I am happy that our contributors to this book, at least not all, but most of them, are here, and I will ask them to say a few words about their own contribution, about their own chapter. Perhaps I can ask Professor Cornelius, Deborah, because as you could see, wrong extracts from your excellent book on Hungary in the Second World War was included with your permission in this book. And so how you see this sad story? Well, you can use this just Bill.
First, I would like to offer my congratulations Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'll start again. I want to congratulate Professor Jasinski and Dr. Kathleen Kadar for the hard work that went into putting together this volume on something that's a very important moment in Hungarian history. I'd just like to comment that when I was doing my research for my book, Hungary in World War II, Caught in the Cauldron, which was about 9 or 10 years ago, I was writing about the German occupation. Such a depressing, awful period, and just one thing after another. And then I read about Kossuth, and that was so exciting that Horthy changed his pattern and actually forbade the deportation of the Jews of Budapest, of course, with no result at first, that this planned coup, the gendarmerie coming into Budapest, which of course was not allowed, and Kossuth volunteering that he would be able to make the move and stop them, circumventing the Germans who were not prepared for anything like this, and in one day preventing the deportation of the Budapest Jews. Unfortunately, it was only for a time, but it was a very exciting moment, and I thought it was wonderful that this volume then explains so much of that period. So again, I was happy that it was possible for part of my book to come into the volume to help explain some of this as an American historian writing about Hungarian history. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. We are very fortunate that we have here the daughter of the Hungarian minister to Stockholm, to Sweden, in 1943, until 1944, until the German occupation. Lovis is here, and I would like to ask you to say a few words about your father's involvement eventually in the rescue, including bringing Wallenberg here to Budapest. But whatever you feel that you have to say about those times, of which, of course, you learned from your father's memoirs and obviously in the family.
6 minutes.
6 minutes, okay.
I feel honored to be here with you today and thank His Excellency Géza Jasinski for inviting me to the launch of July 1944. All I remember from 1944 in the Hungarian legation in Stockholm is crawling under my father's desk. But I do have 2 first-hand accounts. My mother, Lovis Cumberbatch, kept a daily journal in which she recorded everything she observed. My second and main source is the archive of the Ullain Revitsky Antal Foundation, an unparalleled collection of memorabilia covering the political history of Hungary from the late 1920s through the 1940s. In 1944, Ullain Revitsky, an irreconcilable foe of the Nazis, was no longer in Budapest, where he could not have escaped the Germans. Hitler himself had described him as the evil genius of the Hungarian government. Thus, in September 1943, Prime Minister Kálay sent Ullain Revitsky to Stockholm, charging him in his capacity as minister with the task of bringing to a successful conclusion the negotiations with the Allies aimed at Hungarian withdrawal from the war. When the Germans occupied Hungary on March 19, 1944, Uline Revitsky immediately rebelled against the government imposed on Hungary by the Nazis, refusing to recognize the arch-Nazi Dömer Stolyai, the man who now has openly betrayed Hungary by assuming the premiership there under Hitler and Himmler, always has been a Quisling, conspiring with equal unconcern against both Hungary and Yugoslavia. The first news about the occupation of Hungary reached my father in Stockholm on the evening of March 21st, when he received coded telegrams signed Außenministerium against all regulations. He replied as constitutional minister of an independent Hungary, "I refuse to bow before any putsch, and I consider it my duty to fight back the invaders with all my might until the complete liberation of my country." Stolyai's response was to relieve him of his post and deprive him of his Hungarian nationality. Father writes that he kept these telegrams as souvenirs without attaching the slightest importance to them. Uline Revitsky was delighted that his breaking away brought with it a change of company. Now he could speak and act openly, something he did not hesitate to do. A committee of dissident ministers was formed to protest against the occupation of Hungary. Against the background of the dreadful persecution that the Jews of Hungary were suffering, in his capacity as Minister for Free Hungary on April 8, 1944, he approached the Swedish foreign minister and asked the Swedish government to raise its voice on behalf of the victims of persecution and to take such steps or make such diplomatic representations as it considers suitable in order to improve the situation for my Jewish fellow countrymen. In the words of Geza Jasensky, most probably it was his friendship with Raoul Wallenberg which induced the brave Swede to go to Hungary in 1944 and help thousands of Jews escape persecution and death. Certainly, not only Jews needed to be wrested from the iron grip of the Nazis. All who were even suspected of the vaguest resistance to Nazism were doomed. In my father's words, under these circumstances, what could be the duty of Hungarian patriots? Without any doubt, to resist. During that month of August 1944, with the Red Army at Hungary's front door and the Germans preparing Budapest for a siege, there remained only one thing to do: drive away the Quisling Stolyai and end the fight that very instant. This duty was above all incumbent on the regent. This ultimate service rendered to the country should be the most supremely significant of his life. I therefore decided to contact him, and to be sure that my letter would reach him, I sent it to his only surviving son, Miklos. I hasten to note that this letter was quite severe, but at the moment it was composed, it would have been difficult not to dot all the I's, given that its main purpose was to shake the regent. Full text in Uline Revitsky's memoirs, German War, Russian Peace. let us remember the words of Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. More than ever before, it is essential to read July 1944. Thank you.
Thank you, Lovis, very much, and we are very grateful for these very moving, very true words. Now, as I indicated, a key role in the saving of Jews of Budapest was played by Lieutenant Colonel Koszorús, and we have a military historian here, Attila Bonhart, the director of the archives of the Institute of Military History, who wrote an essay on the actual performance of Koszorús. And please say your own little contribution, explain, and with a translation. Thank you.
Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim! Elnézést kell kérnem, angol tudásom nem engedi meg, hogy angolul szóljak, ezért kollégám segítségét kérem.
Ladies and gentlemen, my English is not good enough to talk to you in this language, so I need to ask for the assistance of my colleague.
Annak a tanulmánynak a címe, amelyet írtam, Koszorús Ferenc szerepe a budapesti zsidóság deportálásának megakadályozásában.
The title of the chapter I wrote for this book is the role of Ferenc Koszorús in stopping the deportation of Jews in Budapest.
A kérdés az, hogy került egy katona ilyen pozícióba, aki soha nem foglalkozott politikával.
The question is how a soldier came to this position who never before dealt with politics.
Ennek megértéshez vissza kell nyúlnunk Magyarország német megszállásához.
To understand this, we need to go back to the German occupation of Hungary.
Mint ismert, Magyarországot ellenállás nélkül szállták meg a németek.
As it is known, Hungary was occupied by the Germans without any resistance.
Ami számukra a legkedvezőbb volt, hisz így a magyar katonai, ipari és mezőgazdasági potenciál fennakadás nélkül áll továbbra is a háború rendelkezésére.
Which was most favorable for the country because in this way industrial and military power and production remained at hand for the country.
Ugye a kormányzó a helyén maradt, ez volt a kérdés alfája és omegája.
The regent also stayed in position, and that was the most crucial issue of this question.
A kérdés, miért maradt a helyén a kormányzó?
The question is why the regent remained in his place.
Ma abban reménykedett, hogy ha háború menetébe fordulat áll be, akkor ő lesz az a személy, akivel a szövetségesek tárgyalni tudnak.
He hoped that if there was a change in the course of the war, he would be the person whom the allies would try to negotiate.
És a magyar honvédség érintetlen marad, és szükség esetén, mint a honvédség legfőbb parancsnoka, támaszkodhat majd a magyar hadseregre a kiugrásnak.
Also, if the Hungarian military remained untouched and could be used later, that would be the key of later resistance.
Tehát tulajdonképpen a külső szemlélő szemébe a német megszállás úgy látszott, mintha egy kormányváltás történt volna csupán.
So, in the eyes of the international public, the occupation of Hungary seemed to be only a change of government.
De volt egy jelenség, amely túlmutatott ezen. Ez pedig a magyar zsidóság kérdésének végső megoldása volt, amelyet a németek évek óta erőltettek Magyarországra.
But there was a big thing that made a big difference, and that was the Holocaust, the deportation of Jews, which the Germans had tried to force on Hungarian leaders for years.
Mint elhangzott már, Eichmann vezetésével egy stáb érkezett Magyarországra, amely kidolgozta a magyar zsidóság deportálásának ügyét.
As it has already been mentioned, a staff, a detachment with the leading of Eichmann came to Hungary to work out the detailed plans of deportations of Hungarian Jews.
A terv az volt, hogy a zsidóságot a gettókba gyűjtik össze, majd pedig az óramutató járásával megegyező irányba, a Kárpátaljától lefelé elindulva viszik ki, legvégső állomás Budapest lett volna.
The plan was to collect all Jews to ghettos and starting with the Subcarpathia, the northeast of Hungary, in a clockwise direction, collect and deport all Jews from Hungary, finishing the task in Budapest.
Ez a budapesti deportáció július 6-a és 8-a között zajlott volna le.
The deportation of Jews from Budapest would have taken place between the 6th and 8th of July 1944.
A németeknek nem volt ehhez megfelelő karhatalmuk, ezért a magyar belügyminisztérium segítségét kérték.
The Germans didn't have the policing troops to do all this, so they asked for the help of the Hungarian Ministry of the Interior.
A sztójai kormány belügyminisztere Jaros Andor és két államtitkára, Baki László és Endre László készséggel bocsátották a magyar közigazgatást és a csendőrséget célból a németek rendelkezésére.
The Minister of Interior and the two state secretaries, whose names were already mentioned, were ready to help, and they assisted with this task very keenly.
Mint elhangzott már, ugye vidéken a csendőrség biztosította a karhatalmat, tehát a vidéki zsidóságnak a gettókba való őrzése, a vonatokhoz való kísérése és a vonatoknak a határig való eljuttatása volt a csendőrség feladata.
So they provided the help of the gendarmerie, which was the policing troop in the countryside, and their task was to collect and escort Jews to trains.
Igen ám, de Budapesten a csendőrségnek nem volt hatásköre. Az volt a probléma, hogy hozzák be Budapestre a csendőrséget.
But the gendarmerie had no power in the capital, in Budapest, so the question was how to bring the gendarmerie to the capital.
Kidolgoztak egy forgatókönyvet, mely szerint egy zászlószentelés ürügyén több csendőrzászlót hoznak fel Pestre, és a zászlószentelés utáni napokon hajtják végre az akciót.
The key of the plan was a mimed flag inauguration celebration, where a great number of gendarmerie would have been brought to the capital, and so their presence was secured.
És valóban a tervek szerint megindult áprilisban a gettósítás, május elején megkezdődött a zsidóság deportálása Auschwitz felé.
And according to plans, collecting Jewish peoples into ghettos started in April, and deportations started in May.
Időközben azonban nyilvánosságra kerültek az auschwitzi jegyzőkönyvek, amelyek lerántották a leplet arról, hogy a németek mit művelnek ugye a haláltáborokban.
But in the meantime, the Auschwitz report came to light, and everybody got to know what really happened in Hungary.
Ezek a jegyzőkönyvek Budapesten is megérkeztek, és ezen kívül a szemsemleges államok és a szövetségesek is a kormányzó tudomására hozták, hogyha folytatják a deportációt, akkor nem fognak vele tárgyalni. Magyarország a feltétel nélküli megadásig kell, hogy működjön.
So both the reports reached Budapest, and also the allies and neutral states made it clear for the regions that they would not negotiate with him unless the deportations would be stopped.
Ja, a kormányzó belátta és lépéseket igyekezett tenni a deportáció leállítására.
The region saw that this was he had to take steps to stop the deportations. That was the only way out.
Először is a kikeresztelkedett zsidók, a mentesített zsidók, majd végül pedig a munkaszolgálatra alkalmas zsidók és családtagjainak visszatartását akarta.
So first, he wanted to help Jews who became Christians. Then he wanted to help the Jews who served as forced laborers.
Ezt tulajdonképpen az akaratát nem teljesíték. Tehát a következő lépés az lett volna, hogy a Baki és Endre államtitkárokat, akik felelősek voltak a zsidók deportációjáért, váltsák le.
He also wanted to remove from their positions the state secretaries who were responsible for the deportation of Jews.
Azonban ezeket nem hajtották, ez júniusban van, nem hajtották végre.
All this took place in June, and this didn't happen. They were not removed from their positions.
A kormányzó úgy érezte, hogy tulajdonképpen az ő hatalma ellen egy puccs készül, vagy ha nem is akarják eltávolítani, tulajdonképpen negligálják az ő rendelkezéseit.
The region felt that his orders were neglected, and he also thought that there might be a coup against him.
Félő volt, hogy a szövetségesek bizalmát teljesen elveszti, és ezzel Magyarország az utolsó szövetséges színvonal süllyed, tehát nem fognak tárgyalni vele.
He feared that he would lose the benevolence of the allies and they would not negotiate with him.
Attól tartott, hogy Baki László és Endre László vezetésében egy puccsot hajtanak végre, ahol egy német barát kormányzatot juttatnak hatalomra.
He feared that with the help of the two state secretaries, a pro-Nazi government would come to power.
Hiába kérte a vezérkar főnökének katonai karhatalmat az ő személyes és politikai biztonsága érdekében.
He asked for personal and political help from the military, from the chief of staff, in vain.
Tehát a vezérkar főnök a legfelsőbb katonától, legelső katonától nem kapta meg ezt a biztosítékot.
So from the head of the army, the chief of staff did not obey the order. És
ekkor esett a választás Koszorús Ferencre, aki az első páncélos hadtest vezérkari főnöke volt.
And that's when Colonel Koszorús was chosen, who was the chief of staff of the first armored division.
Akinek megfelelő erős katonai tudás állott a rendelkezésére.
Who had very thorough military knowledge.
Koszorús Ferenc megtervezte, megszervezte és a csapataival végrehajtatta a csendőrségnek a Budapestről való eltávolítását július 6-áról 7-ére véradó éjszaka.
From the 6th to the 7th of July, during the night, according to his plans, the removal of the gendarmerie troops from Budapest was executed.
Ezzel eltávolította a karhatalmat, amely lehetővé tette volna a Budapesten élő 200-250 zsidónak a deportálását.
So the policing troops that might have been able to take part in the deportation of Jews in Budapest, 250,000 people were removed from the capital.
Van egy ilyen magyar mondás, hogy aki időt nyer, életet nyer.
There is a Hungarian saying, who gains time saves lives.
És ezt tette Koszorús Ferenc, időt nyert a budapesti zsidóság számára.
And that's what Ferenc Koszorús did. He gained time for the Jews of Budapest.
Véleményem szerint teljesen mindegy, hogy ön elhatározás vagy a kormányzó utasítására.
In my opinion, it's all the same if he did this by his own decision or by the orders of the regent.
Az is mindegy, hogy milyen célból hajtották végre a csendőrök eltávolítását.
Also, it's all the same why, for what purpose the gendarmerie was removed from the capital.
Az eredmény az volt, hogy a budapesti zsidóságot nem tudták akkor elhurcolni.
The result was that the deportation of the Jews from Budapest could not happen.
Amikor a technikai és karhatalmi erők rendelkezésükre álltak.
At the time when the policing troops and the military power was at hand for the pro-Nazis and the Germans.
Így a közvetlen pusztulástól megmenekültek, és ez Koszorús Ferenc érdeme.
Thus they were saved from direct danger, and that's the merit of Ferenc Koszorús.
Köszönöm szépen.
Student and good friend Tamás Stark to summarize the question, the old question, really about the numbers. We of course know that the numbers are very important, but the fact remains that whether there was what happened really. But please, Tamás, give your own summary of your great researches.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. It was a great honor for me to contribute to this book. And the title of my chapter is Facts about the Number of Shoah Victims in Hungary. I wanted to make a statistical account on the Hungarian victims of the Holocaust. This project may seem to be redundant, because the statistical department of the Hungarian section of World Jewish Congress already determined the number of Hungarian Holocaust victims in 1946. The result of the calculation was 560,000 victims. This figure and the rounded version of this figure, 600,000, was incorporated into numerous historical monographs. The experts of the statistical department of the World Jewish Congress determined the number of Hungarian Holocaust victims in two different ways. They tried to determine the number of the victims in a direct way and in an indirect way. I need to say only some words about the experts of the statistical department of the Hungarian section of the World Jewish Congress. One of the leaders of this organization was, there were two leaders of this organization, Siegfried and Sigmund Pach. Siegfried left Hungary in the late 40s, and he settled in England, and he became a head of a Jewish institution in London. Sigmund Paul Pach, in the late 40s, joined the Communist Party, and he became the president of the Karl Marx University of Economics, and later he became the director of the Institute of History. This is my workplace, and I had the opportunity to meet and to consult with him. So the expert of the statistical department, as I mentioned, tried to determine the losses of the Hungarian Jewish community in a direct way and in an indirect way. As to the indirect way, they deducted the number of the survivors, including those deportees who eventually returned from the concentration camps, from the member of the pre-Holocaust Jewish population. And the result of this subtraction was equal with the number of the Holocaust victims. As to the direct method of calculation, the statistical department also itemized the losses of the Hungarian Jews. I mean by this that they determined the number of the victims of labor battalions, they determined the number of the victims of the deportations, they took into account the victims of death marches and mass murders. Finally, they added up these separate figures. What is interesting, that the result of both methods of calculation was the same, 560,000. The fact that the end results were identical was presented by the statistical department as a proof of the accuracy of the calculations. But the exact correspondence in the figures also raises a shadow of doubt, according to my opinion. My work began here. The problem is that we cannot determine the exact number of the victims of the labor battalion. We cannot determine exactly the victims of the deportation. We have no statistics on those Hungarian Jews who were deported to Germany in late October, early November. We do not know how many Hungarian Jews were handed over to Germany for fortification work in early November 1944. We do not know either the size of the Jewish population before the Holocaust or the number of the survivors. The census of 1941 registered 725,000 Israelites, but we do not know the number of those who were considered Jewish according to the anti-Jewish laws, regardless of religious affiliation. I collected and analyzed all data on the size of the Jewish population before the Holocaust and after the Holocaust. Based on the population census data of 1941, there were about 780,000 to 830,000 Hungarians who fell under the scope of the anti-Jewish laws. Taking into consideration the widely varying number of survivors, the death toll in the war against the Jews was certainly smaller than 560,000, but larger than 450,000. So that was the conclusion of my statistical analysis. Please read it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comerad. And well, having said all that, I think it is quite natural that we are curious what happened to this hero, Colonel Koszorús, after his great deed, whether he escaped the rest of the war, and actually he did, and he eventually ended up in the United States, and we are fortunate that his son, Ferenc Koszorús Jr. is here, and I ask you to tell what you think we should know about your father, about his fate later on, what happened to him, and his afterlife in Hungary.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is it on? Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation to Helena Press, Katalin Kádár, His Excellency Géza Jeszenszky, and the contributors to this volume. They've touched upon an extremely important and heretofore somewhat ignored issue that thank you very much again for that tremendous contribution you made in working on this for the last several years and bringing us all together. I am not a historian. I'm a lawyer, so therefore I know how to research as well. But much more importantly, in terms of the topic that His Excellency mentioned that I should address, I'll start by stating that my mother was a fine artist, and she did a lot of portraits. And whenever she had a portrait that she was working on, she had the subject come in, sit in her studio, and I heard a lot of talk. And I said, afterwards, well, how can you paint and concentrate on depicting that individual when you're talking? And she says, well, I want to capture the inner person. And that's where I start with my father and my knowledge about my father. Ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, we would have a tremendous number of people come in to dinner, and there was discussion about, not about this event per se, because he was a very, he didn't boast about his contributions, but with his friends, Professor McCartney, Bai Zoltán, Rice's Gentile, George Géza, people like that were regular visitors, and it was a virtual history lesson every time they came over, and I listened to that discussion. They made me sit there and listen, which I regretted at the time, but now I'm so glad they didn't. I learned so much about him as a person, what motivated him, what resulted in his taking action in an extremely chaotic time, an extremely dangerous time, and to stand up and to do what is the right thing to do at the right time. He also personified what the Professor Cornelius de Boer mentioned, the caught in a cauldron. He was the personal manifestation or personification of that dilemma, because he disdained both communism, He saw that as a tremendous danger, not only to Hungary, but to the world. He disdained Nazi Germany. He knew and felt that if Nazi Germany were to win the war, they would absorb Hungary. Hungary would cease to exist. And so that's where the cauldron, of course, comes from. As early as 1942, he already predicted that Germany was going to lose the war. That's on record. We've got documents to that effect. And yet he was a professional soldier. He had to fight. One anecdote of his bravery, not only with respect to the Bucky issue and the July event, my mother received a letter from one of his officers back after he had died. And the letter describes how they were leading a tank charge against the T-34 Russian, Romanian troops were attacking. He was bringing his small Hungarian troops up to meet them. And this subordinate of his describes how he jumps out of the tank, Colonel Kosovo jumps out of the tank with a riding crop and on foot goes into the midst of the battle and defeats the enemy at that time. 24 T-34s were destroyed without a single loss to Hungarian tanks. After that battle, and this occurred after the July events, the Bucky events, he became very ill, went into hospital, and another anecdote that I learned, his mother was in the same hospital. He happened to go upstairs from his room to his mother's room, and how fortunate for him, because the Gestapo came in looking for him, and the nurse told the Gestapo that the colonel is downtown shopping, you'll have to come back in several hours, and he's not here right now. So as soon as the Gestapo left, the nurse ran up and said, you better leave right now. And in his memoirs, he suggested that this was the most bitter consequence to him personally of the Bucky action, was that he was not even able to attend his mother's funeral. After he moved westward with his troops, became an American prisoner of war, was examined, investigated, released. He applied to come to the United States, and he was granted permission, and we came to the United States in 1951. Very important, because at that time, right after the war, since Hungary was a former enemy state, they would not allow officers from the Hungarian army to come to the United States. But because of his action, his anti-communist as well as his anti-Nazi action, he was given permission to travel to the United States and to resettle there with his family. We went to California from New York. When we arrived in New York, went to California. He got a job picking apples on a farm. Mother was a washerwoman, despite being a talented artist. And that's how they lived the first year and a half, first 2 years in the United States. And then he was approached by Washington, official Washington. They wanted an officer like my father, who didn't have a Nazi background or a communist background, to put together a battalion of former Hungarian soldiers who would participate in liberating Central and Eastern Europe when and if the United States entered into the region. Now, if you remember, President Eisenhower ran on the campaign of rolling back communism. Well, this program that I just mentioned, that my father was involved with, this was initiated by the Truman administration, which was accused of being soft on communism. It's ironic that as soon as the President Eisenhower is elected, this program of putting together this battalion, and all the other Central European countries had similar initiatives, was tabled, and so in 1953. So in 1953, it was very clear that if there was any uprising in that area in the Soviet bloc that the United States was not going to do anything. And exactly what happened. The people rose up throughout the region every 10, 12 years, and there was no policy to deal with that particular crisis year by year. And in any event, after he got his citizenship, he went to work for the Army in a classified area and could never return. He never returned to Hungary, could never come back. And as a relative of mine wrote an article about him, says, well, he's finally back here in the form of this statue, the bust that sits up on the Castle Hill. And he died in 1974, buried in Arlington, and that's his story in a nutshell. Thank you very much for your patience and for listening.
Thank you very much, Ferry, for telling us about these important and very little known details. I am very happy to say and inform you that his father has not only a memorial plaque near the synagogue in Dohány utca, but a statue was erected to him. It can be seen in front of the Museum of Military History in the Vár, so I think it is very proper to visit that statue and to see that very belatedly, but at least Hungary's native Hungary has recognized his merits. Well, that is the end of this introduction, this book launching, and I am very grateful for all of you to have come and listened to us. Of course, the book can be bought here at a very good reduced price. Well, to celebrate the coming out of the book, we invite you for a little reception and to discuss further details with the authors of the book. Thank you for coming again.